Hello there, and welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I'm going to share some recommendations for Star Wars comics. Before we get started, I'm inviting you to join the conversation with us. We can be found on Twitter and Hive at Force Ghost Pod. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok just by searching Force Ghost Conversations. Also, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your listening site of choice. Plus, Force Ghost Conversations is live on Patreon. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Finally, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. All right, everybody, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, and we're getting into a topic that I have not really talked thus far about in the podcasting world, and that is, of course, comic books. We've been so spoiled with movies, television shows, books, and all the other things in the Star Wars universe that I haven't been able to get to comics, and this is kind of one of the benefits, I would say, of the strike, in addition to hopefully the actors of SAG-AFTRA getting their proper compensation for the work that they do and all that stuff. So they're fighting the good fight. And we, of course, are abiding by the prescribed guidelines from SAG-AFTRA at this time. Is that it allows us that we can talk about stuff that is not struck work, which includes books and comics. Now, we've done an episode before about some book recommendations that I have, and I want to do that for comic books here, which is a medium that I have loved for many years now, almost 20 years now. Since I was a kid, we had a comic shop, Brainstorm Comics, in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, which is where I got my first comic books at, which I believe was a free comic book store day of Anakin and Obi-Wan at the time, which was really, really wonderful, and it helped break me into that world. And, I've been a fan of the medium ever since. So what I wanted to do with this episode is just give you a top 5 list, not necessarily a top 5 list of like, these are my favorite, the best Star Wars comic books, etc. No, these are just recommendations for you all. So you may love them, you may hate them. This is purely for those that want to dive further into this medium, which continues to grow and tell massive amounts of stories in this universe, the far, far away universe of it all, and highlighting unknown characters, bringing characters to the forefront that we probably would have never gotten in any other way, shape, or form, expanding upon stories, all that fun stuff that we get to do through this medium. And of course, it's comic books. Comic books are a top dog in the industry today of popular culture, of course, with popular movies and TV shows, bridging the gaps between those that just love the comics medium and those that love the characters in multiple types of formats. So to start, I wanted to list, actually, for number 5, 2 I'm already kind of breaking my rules here with number 5, but we're going into with 2 entries for number 5. And basically my entry for number 5 is adaptations. Marvel Comics, who owns the Star Wars license at this time, obviously because they're working with Disney, is a company that knows their audience well. And when a new film or TV show has come out, generally they've done an adaptation of that story in comic book form. And the benefit of doing that is you can get inside the characters' heads a bit more. You can't necessarily get that in movies, and book adaptations of films do that quite well. And comic books are also another way to add more depth to a story that we see in a different way. And these 2 examples here, which again, I'm just calling adaptations for this number 5 here, but these top 2 that I wanted to highlight are just excellent examples of how the medium can showcase different things as they're going about. So, for example, I wanted to highlight the Rogue One adaptation from 2017, mostly because I love how it just ends with the last page being the opening crawl to episode 4. That's just brilliant, if you ask me. Like, people always say, like, do you think there'll be a Rogue 2? Yeah, there is a Rogue 2 already, and it's called Episode 4: A New Hope. So I just love how that comic book transitions directly from the ending of that film into the crawl. So it's literally how I often watch Rogue One, which is a direct double feature going straight into Episode 4, A New Hope. So a lot of fun with that one. You certainly don't want to miss it. The other adaptation that I want to talk about is one that gets more into the heads of the characters, which is, of course, a film that I love dearly here, which is The Last Jedi. And in that comic book, especially with the passing of Luke Skywalker, spoiler alert, it happens in that movie, you just get more of that peace and purpose that is talked about, and the looking at the twin suns. And I just remember reading that comic and just being so in awe with the moment again, where I may be paraphrasing here, but the text says something to the extent of, it begins just as it ended, looking into the twin suns, right? We're talking about the passing of Skywalker. The journey begins with him looking at the twin suns, and it ends, of course, with his passing, doing his final Jedi acts of moments, looking at the twin suns again as he's giving his last energy, if you will, for the Resistance to continue on and continue fighting, which we see lead on to the events of Episode 9, and Rey's able to take her place in the story of it all. So that's where we're leaving off at part 5 here, or number 5, I should say, of my recommendations. Adaptations, don't sleep on them. They highlight some fun, interesting things. And again, you get to see new interpretations of stuff that you got to see on screen. Number 4 is kind of a bit of what we call tie-in. So comics also do tie-ins to various types of media, whether it be books or film, or honestly, sometimes they'll do annual issues, which are books within the comic book runs themselves here. But that's whole nitty-gritty nerdy stuff that we can get into at another date and time. But this one, specifically this issue that I wanted to highlight as number 4, is the C-3PO one-shot that was released after The Force Awakens. It came out in 2016, but it showcases an important story, frankly, for those that were wondering. You may have seen that C-3PO has a red arm in that movie, and that's not because of any coincidence or circumstance, right? There is a story behind that, which is just one of the many fun things about the galaxy far, far away, of course, is that you get to everything, like in the hero's journey, right? Everything is or even these B-movie serials that inspired the galaxy far, far away, is that everywhere you turn, there's a brand new adventure. There's a storytelling here, right? It's tip of the iceberg storytelling, as we talk about often here on the podcast, that, everywhere you turn, there's 1,000 different stories that can be told. You go another street down the road, there's another 1,000 stories that can be told, etc. So this is clearly something that C-3PO is like, oh, you're wondering why I have this red arm. You probably didn't recognize me, right, Han Solo? And you get the full backstory of why he has that red arm, which is just a really beautiful story. Anthony Daniels has read it out loud on Celebration floors before, so I'm pretty sure those videos are on YouTube if you want to go check those out. But it's just a really great, heartwarming comic that I think shows the depth to the droids that we don't necessarily get to see in films. So certainly not one to miss out on for sure. Number 3, moving on to a full comic run here, issues 1 through 25 of Darth Vader from 2015. Yes, kind of a spin-off of the Star Wars mainline from 2015, which kind of relaunched with the Marvel comics books when they reacquired the license in 2015. And of course, with the release of The Force Awakens as well. This story takes place in between episodes 4 and 5, and kind of really bridges that gap between A New Hope and Empire for Darth Vader specifically. And it goes all over the place. This is a really great comic story with a condensed 1 through 25 storyline. Issues 1 through 25, I should say. So each individual issue is very important to that story. And it tells you how he finds out about Luke, because in the crawl of episode 4, or not episode 4, but episode 5, sorry, it's clear that Vader knows who Luke Skywalker is, right? He's on the relentless pursuit of Luke Skywalker. But how does he know that from the person who destroys the Death Star? And this is where that comic book goes on that journey here. And of course, there's massive disarray along the way. We get introduced to a ton of new fan favorite characters, such as Dr. Aphra, BT, and 000, which are death-defying droids, or deathly droids, I should say. Very much dark black versions, if you will, in terms of the paint color of the metal for C-3PO and R2-D2, the opposites of them naturally, who are just wonderful fan favorites of my own. And I know a lot of people that have read this comic line have also taken to them, and those have been expanded upon further in the Dr. Aphra issues that have spin off from this storyline. But again, a wonderful adventure full of intrigue and journeys into Vader's mind, the deception behind the scenes of the Sith, all that great stuff comes into play here. So definitely don't want to miss out on this one. Number two for my recommendations is kind of tipping off what I said earlier, but Star Wars, the main issue line from 2015 that helped to relaunch um, the Marvel Comics line, basically the ongoing line. There's, I think, 75 in this run fully before it completed the story that I wanted to tell. So, which they have since revamped and restarted again to tell the story in between Empire and Return of the Jedi. But now this specific one that I'm talking about is in between episodes 4 and 5, literally stepping off from the events of episode 4 and going right to Echo Base on Hoth, which is, this is a great comic line, lots of great fun stories in the midst here, lots of I should say arcs of stories. So you get maybe 5 or 6 issues of a specific arc, which are really cool. You go to Jedha for some stuff. You learn about the events, or Luke learns about the events of Rogue One. I think I always gravitate towards the first couple of issues where they strike back again, right? The Rebels, not only do they have this massive victory against the Death Star, but they also are able to strike back again and knock out a Imperial weapons facility, which I just find to be so fascinating. And it makes sense to me too that they would do that. They want to strike the Iron Rods hot. They're not the Empire's not expecting it. And of course, our band of heroes, Luke, Han, and Leia, are a part of this. And this is really where Luke encounters Vader for the first time. It leads to the Vader Down crossover, which is really a great event. So all this fun stuff stems from the Star Wars 2015 mainline that you certainly don't want to miss out if you're a fan of the universe, but also you want to know what happens between episodes 4 and 5, because there's 2 years in between there, that there's so much storytelling that could be taking place, and finally we get a sense of that. So that leads me to my number one. And my number one recommendation, which I tell anybody if they're going to start Star Wars comics, is the Darth Vader 2017 run by Charles Soule. It is a 1 through 25 condensed story that literally takes place after the Vader goes into the suit in Revenge of the Sith and says no. It starts from that climactic moment, and you learn so much more about Vader, how he becomes Vader. It's a Vader origin story, if you will, and it is so fascinating and wonderful and incredible, literally all the way up to issue 25, which is bone-chilling if you ask me. You'll start with the finding of the Barash Bow, how Vader assembles his lightsaber, how the Inquisitors come together, how Vader creates his castle, the hunt for Jocasta Nu. All this great stuff comes into play, and it is just absolutely fantastic and wonderful. I cannot recommend a greater Star Wars comic issue than Vader 2017, especially if you're a fan of the prequels. If you're a fan of Vader, this is essential, not even just reading, but storytelling to understand for the Star Wars universe as it plays out, right? This is a canonic storytelling event that you cannot miss out on. And trust me, it's worth getting. So whether you get it via a trade paperback, you go to your local comic shop and you get all in 25 issues on your own, or if you have Marvel Unlimited, which is a great resource, so you can pay like $60 a year and you have access to just about every single Marvel comic released within the last 6 months, and you can read them digitally. So if you don't want to pay the exuberant rates potentially for comics, or you want to just enjoy them a bit more, go back and reread issues, or you just don't want to keep the space. I know that can be an issue with comics. Apologies, I want to take a sip of water there. If you just want to, just listen to read the stories and all that stuff and move on, just ingest a whole boatload of comics. Plus, you get access to all of Marvel, Star Wars, anything that falls under their licenses on that platform, which is a really cool thing. Which is where you can find all of these stories right now. But again, I don't want to take people away from local independent comic book shops. Those are great places where you can hang out with cool people, find something that you maybe didn't know before, get introduced to a whole set of stories that may invite you into a brand new world. All that fun stuff is on the table here. So that is where I am at with some comic recommendations here. So take it as you will. If you're a fan of that stuff, great. If not, let me know what I potentially missed out on. I know there's like Rise of Kylo Ren comic issue, a lot of like the Age of Republic, Age of Empire, Age of Resistance stories, those one shots that I think are a lot of fun too that I probably missed out on. So let me just rehash again the numbers 5 through 1 here. So number 5 I just kind of title as adaptations, but I highlighted the Rogue One and the Last Jedi comic book adaptations. Number 4 I had the C-3PO one shot from 2016. 2015 we had the Darth Vader comic book line 1 through 25 from 2015, of course. We had the Star Wars 2015 comic book line from 2015, I think I mentioned already, the main line. And last, for number 1, my number 1 recommendation is the Darth Vader Charles Soule 2017 line. Trust me, you will not regret checking out those books. You will have such a great time and all that stuff. So that's where I land on all those recommendations here. I'd love if the strike continues on, we'll maybe do some deep dives into some of these arcs, which I think will be a lot of fun, and maybe you can read along too at home if you want to engage in those conversations too. So with that, folks, that's all I had for this week. Thanks again for keeping up with us as we go through this strike period here, which is, of course, you never know how it's going with that, but we hope that the actors are getting fighting hard in negotiations for their just due compensation and all that. And we, of course, are going to keep supporting them here through this time. So until then, we'll be back next week, folks, with a brand new episode. May the Force be with you. Take care.